my name's David Aujla. By day, I'm a multi-asset portfolio manager. And I'd like to say by night, but it's also by day. I'm the social mobility workstream co-lead along with James Whiteman, who you'll hear from later on this big, huge panel that I'm not sure whether people are going to be, but they're going to be here, and you can ask them questions that I forget to ask these two. So with me, I have Sarah Atkinson, who for the last 3 years has been the CEO of the Social Mobility Foundation. You will have seen probably quite a lot of their stuff on LinkedIn, and you might not even have known it's them. They have a campaigning arm called the Department for Opportunities, and recently they've done a really, really good sort of Halloween-based campaign called Stay Down. I've also got Tom Lyas, who's been interested and active in social mobility for the last decade or so. He's the head of resourcing at a regional law firm that happens to have a city presence, and there's a lot we can learn from Tom, which I'll come on to in a moment. Both of them, of course, in fact. But first, I'd like to thank you very much for your time to come and talk to us today. Before we get into talking to Sarah and Tom, I just wanted to give you a recap on some of the things we covered last year, the kind of why does this matter for our industry. And these are the results here on the screens behind me of a survey done by the Bridge Group with a number of large financial services organizations back in 2020. And what it showed was that over 5 in 10 roles in financial services in the UK were held by people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And despite no evidence of a difference in performance, it took people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds 25% longer to progress. And that's without any change in performance. Quite staggering. And the problem, I guess this is, for me, the most stark statistic, is at the top. The decision makers, the influencers, the people who basically determine the trajectory of our industry is hugely skewed. Pretty much 9 out of 10 leaders in financial services are from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So just want to put that in your minds as we're talking today about some of the challenges we're going to face and, crucially, some of the things that we can do. The other thing I wanted to highlight was that we talk about ourselves in investment and savings in particular as a people industry. You know, our people are basically our talent, our asset, it's what we do. We don't have amazing technology hidden somewhere that's our kind of USP that makes us, gives us an advantage. And I think the whole time I've been in the industry, we've probably thought of ourselves as competing with each other for talent. So Invesco competes with Jupiter or Lazard or whoever it happens to be. I think now we're in a world where actually we're competing with everyone. It's a bigger war for talent. And this Employers Index, which is, this is last year's one, which is an output of the Social Mobility Foundation, shows that. You know, there are no investment and savings companies in the top 20. Thankfully, because it would be incredibly awkward otherwise, the 21st is Aviva, who obviously are our host today. And so not only are they holding up our side on the social mobility front, but of course they're lending us their real estate as well, and fantastic as it is. So we'll hear from Sarah, of course, about the Employers Index shortly, but I wanted to flag who's number 1 on that. It's Browne Jacobson. You can see there are law firms, professional service firms, even government departments who are doing well, but the people who have done the best last year are Browne Jacobson, and that law firm that Tom's from happens to be called Browne Jacobson. So today we're going to learn from Tom some of the things that they've put into practice to get from 82nd, I think it was, in 2019.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, then 5th,
yep.
And then 1st.
Yeah, 2nd the year before, and then 1st. And hopefully, I'm hoping, we'll find out that it doesn't need to break the bank to do it. I'd like to start, though, to bring you into this with a quick question about each in turn, really, about why social mobility matters to you, and actually why should we all care about it? Sarah.
So you can see some of the stats that we regularly share when we're in conversation with people about social mobility. It matters because we really want it to be true that how hard you work and how good you are the things that define your outcomes. But actually, where you grew up, went to school, and what your parents do hugely, much more significantly determines your outcomes. Your social class origins also leave an imprint that has a lasting effect. Even if you get successful, you get more wealthy, or you get more successful in status later in your life. And we see this in every economy of the world. So social mobility is really impacting us and future generations. That's obviously it's not fair. It's not the kind of country we want to live in. It's not what you want to tell young people. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Things are set for you anyway. it's also, as well as being not right from your heart, it's also not right in your head. Your organisations want the most talented people. You want people who are going to work hardest. You want communities to be invested in getting involved in your organisations and your industry. So it doesn't make sense to miss talent. It doesn't make sense to fail to retain and sustain talent because of these social mobility barriers that are impacting. So my heart is in this, and that's why I do it for, committed my career to it. But my head is also in this, that this doesn't make sense from the point of view of any organisation or sector that wants to make the most of people talent.
Yeah, very similar to Sarah. I think the unfairness for me, David, is really, it's great to hear Sarah talk about head and heart. My heart is very much there. Somebody's background, where they were born, what their family history is, can dictate, their career, their ambitions, their aspirations. I find that actually quite difficult to deal with. But also, from a head perspective, my job is to resource our firm. I want to fish in the biggest possible pool of talent, not a puddle. And actually, you have to break down a significant number of barriers to access that talent. And as I said, if you look a bit more broadly, then you tend to be a more diverse organisation, and who wouldn't want to work in a more diverse organisation?
Great, thank you. Well, you mentioned talent there, and particularly in your role as a resourcer, a sort of judge of talent, so to speak. Helena mentioned our speaker series, the Potential Over Polish. One of the things Matthew Syed said in the first one was about linear versus complex problems, and it kind of resonated in terms of who we try and hire and how. He said, I think he used the example of the 4x100 metre race, and he said, look, in some things, a linear problem, what you don't want is diversity. That's the last thing you want. What you want is the best person as many times as you can get them, because there's only one right answer. So he sort of said, look, if you can clone Usain Bolt 4 times, that's what you want. You're going to win pretty much every time. Is it fair to say that what we're doing, well, most of these industries that we've seen on the Employers Index are more complex problems? And do you think that we're guilty of hiring for a linear problem when really what we need is people to solve more complex problems? Yeah,
certainly. I mean, my background, I've been in recruitment for around 22 years now. It feels like 5 minutes, but yeah, a long time. I've been at organisations like Tesco, Whitbread, and obviously subsequently find myself at law firm Browne, Jacobson. And I remember a decade ago, a bit of a sort of penny drop moment where I looked after the graduate programme for 42 different schemes in 13 different countries, yet the process was pretty much the same. And I remember thinking, everybody, there were great hires, we thought they were great hires, but everybody was the same. They thought the same, came from a similar background, and we got to, it's a horrible phrase to use, but we said they're quite cookie-cutter graduates. And at that point, it was like, something isn't working, something is cutting out the talent that has a different perspective. So I think, you have to look at everything, what's the end result, what are you trying to achieve with your hire, and put a process that's actually relevant and in context to that need.
One thing I did want to ask as well, and I probably would have asked it later, but it kind of strikes me as now is a good time to do it, because we've talked about intersectionality, or certainly Helena has and Mitesh has. What would you say, and Sarah, this may be one for you, to people who say, well, look, we're already focusing on gender, we're already focusing on race and ethnicity, surely that just captures most of the things we need to sort out. And this will kind of fall out just accidentally almost as a byproduct.
Yeah, and I do hear that. I hear that from lots of organisations who say, sometimes it's not now, but later, or sometimes it's not that because this. We absolutely know, I mean, firstly, that people are complex. We have many identities and perspectives. Everyone is a product, like it or not, of your socioeconomic background. You've had some headwinds and some tailwinds, some things that have made it easier for you to access help or opportunity or to understand careers. You've had some tailwinds, some things that have made it more challenging or more difficult or given you barriers. And we're all on a spectrum and a range when it comes to socioeconomic background. So social mobility and social mobility barriers are happening in your organisation right now. They are holding back people who would be good enough to get into your organisation who can't get in. And they're holding back people who are in your organisation who have the potential to be really successful and lead, but who you aren't getting the chance. So it's not a choice about whether this is happening to your organisation. It's a choice about whether you're engaging with it. And absolutely, organisations who engage with social mobility find it isn't an as well as, it's absolutely a mobiliser and an energiser for all your other diversity and inclusion conversations, because it recognises that everybody needs the right opportunities and the right help, and it's working out what kind of opportunity they have. I mean, Tom, I know you found this in your work.
Yeah, very much so. And, you know, again, I'm always extremely transparent. And, you know, I think back to, you know, the processes we had in place, you know, the thought processes as well as the physical processes. And I'm not ashamed to sit here and say, actually, look back and you know, it's delightful to be in the position that we're in now, not the firm, but just, you know, kind of industry more general, particularly when it's potential over polish. I can't tell you how many times 10 years ago I heard, oh yeah, they're really, really good. They could be, you know, diamond in the rough, that sort of thing. But actually this person's just a bit more polished. But nobody understood or looked under the surface as to, well, why are they more polished? That was one thing. I mean, the second thing as well, I mean, I'm going to give a short case study, and it is, you know, I'll caveat this with, this was our world. I'm not saying it will fully transfer into your worlds, but hopefully it will do. But actually, the one thing is we have a D&I committee, and, you know, we'll have various communities from D&I, disability, ethnicity, etc. But the social mobility piece is woven so deeply through everything. And actually, we set off on a journey. It's taken us to a place, some of which we expected, others we didn't expect. And that's been something which it's been great to see. And as I said, you know, it has taken in a lot of other communities when only we focused on social mobility, but actually I don't want to say it's a byproduct because that's, you know, a bit disrespectful for me, but it's, we didn't realise at the time it was going to do that. We're a bit more educated now and understand how that intersectionality works, and it's undisputable.
So one key message would be actually that it's powerful. Addressing social mobility is a powerful kind of enabler of what you may already else be doing on gender, ethnicity, disability, all those other things. I know that quite a lot of what you managed to achieve at your firm was because of the Employers Index that Sarah, of course, your firm, your organisation runs. Before Tom dives into the sort of case study, what they did, can you give us just a high-level overview of what it is and what it involves?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been running the Social Mobility Employer Index for 5 or 6 years now in our charity. It was born out of all the work that we did directly with young people, meant that we understood a lot about the kind of barriers that they faced and the kind of challenges that employers were needing to explore to open up their opportunities. So it was a way of taking the insight we had and also of ensuring that organisations on this social mobility journey could share and get access to good practice. So the index, it's an annual benchmarking study. As an employer, you enter, you fill in a kind of questionnaire with us, you share information with us. We give you a benchmarking report, so whether you come top or whether you come right at the bottom, we give you a benchmarking report that says, here are the things you're doing well at, here are the things you could do better at, here are some examples of the kind of things we're seeing that might be helpful for you. And it gives you a structure to work on. And then we publish that top 75. So if you do incredibly badly, that's between us and you. We tell you what we'd like you to do better, and you can take that. But if you do well, we celebrate that, we publish that, we encourage you to celebrate and publish it, and we share what you're doing with our insights so that more organisations can learn and be part of it. It's become quite an influential piece, you know, as well as those individual organisations that are part of it, policymakers and the media engage with it. And industry bodies kind of look at the index to see who's going where. So it can be really powerful to drive your own practice, and it can be really powerful as a benchmark to understand what's happening across sectors.
I remember being stood up here with James actually this time last year, and that index report had just come out that morning, and unfortunately I had to say the same thing about the top 20. There were no investment and savings companies in there, and then again Aviva was, I think, the top at the time. A question for me, just before we get into this case study, is it a case that from investment savings firms aren't doing the work, aren't approaching it, or is it a case of they're just not doing well and progressing well?
So it's a mix. We don't name and shame, so don't worry, I'm not going to list organisations that enter and don't do well, but there are organisations in this sector that are not in the top performers. But absolutely, law, professional services, public bodies, civil service departments, they are entering in much bigger numbers. Some of that is about resonance in that sector, action of regulators, leadership from some of the big firms, and a bit of intra-competitiveness, which I'm happy to see. Some of that is probably about long-standing recognition of how the problem has been impacting those organisations, those sectors. They know they're being held back. But certainly I would say this is a sector that absolutely can and should be doing more, particularly not just around that outreach and entry, but around progression, data. Those are the kind of key pieces where we need more leadership and more driving from organisations in this sector if we're going to really see social mobility move.
Great. Do you mind passing that to Tom?
Of course.
Tom, given what Sarah's just said about what we need to do to kind of rise up those rankings and start making a bit more of an impact in this place as the 100-member firms that hopefully have at least one or more representative watching, it'd be great if you could just take us with that case study through some of the key things you did, and particularly if you can, as you go through, highlight those things that you think move the dial most.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. And again, Sarah's heard me say this on a number of occasions, but I literally cannot say thank you enough to the Social Mobility Foundation for the journey that they've helped us go on. I'd say that if Sarah was here, I'd say it if Sarah wasn't here. Our journey started 5-6 years ago, and as I said, it started with a first entry into the social mobility, the new, as it was at the time, index, and the report we got back became our instruction manual. Without that, we, not embarrassed to say, we were like, well, where do you go? Because it is such a great source of direction. So, thank you for listening. I'm just going to take you through, maybe over the course of the next 6 or 7 minutes, our journey, effectively. So, as David had said, I lead the resourcing function for a regional firm called Browne Jacobson. By context, we're about 1,000 people, about 95 million pound turnover, with the 53rd largest law firm in the country. So, we sort of sit in the middle ground. We are so far away from the big city firms, but equally we're big enough to count. As you've heard, I worked for Whitbread, I worked for Tesco. My journey in social mobility started when I saw early careers, so graduate intern recruitment on such a big scale that you could start to see trends rather than just individual nuances. And as I said, it just initially didn't feel right. Gut instinct, that's what it was. And we started to put some data behind it, which I'll come on to, the importance of data. But ultimately, where we find ourselves today is our social mobility program is under a banner called FAIR. FAIR is it's the heart of our commitment to breaking down these barriers, of which there are many in the legal profession, but as Sarah has alluded to, good progress has been made, but there is plenty further to go, particularly in terms of when you're in an organisation, how you not just get in, but get on. FAIR, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit cheesy. I came up with it about 1:30 in the morning, having spent all day thinking, this is not fair. But FAIR stands for Fairer Access into Real Experience, and it is our flagship programme. I walked in, having had that idea, next day spoke to a senior partner and my boss, the HR director, and I said, look, if we're serious about trying to make an impact here, then we need to make some significant changes, which I'll talk you through here. So again, why did we need it? It's always good just to sort of set the scene here. It comes down to everybody having equal access to the profession of their choice, not just law, but certainly in our world, it is the legal profession. The barriers that are in place for access are just astronomical. From competition for work experience, nepotism, various other challenges, high academic bars. But it is extremely, I can see why people refer to it as a profession which is quite elitist. I'm not going to sit here and say, look how good we are. I'm not going to sit here and say, we've solved it, I'm the guru, all this, because I couldn't be further away from that. We are still at the start of our journey, but where we've come from is quite an impressive place. So, we weren't any different. This is around, pre-2016. And the reason we weren't any different is we didn't have a clue who was in the firm. We didn't know the makeup of our individuals. We didn't know what backgrounds they were from, et cetera, et cetera. We just didn't collect data So again, that's a point I'm going to hammer home a few times. In terms of, we've talked about race, ethnicity, from an intersectionality perspective, and I'll come back to that, in 2016, just having in your mind that our junior intake, so our training contracts, our work experience, etc., we were 7% black, Asian or ethnic minority. Again, I talked about going to bed one evening thinking that's not fair. It was on a day when in the afternoon I'd found out that positive Browne Jacobson offered 80 work experience placements. Sadly, they were all unpaid, but that's for a story we'll come on to. But importantly, 96% of those opportunities went to either clients or partners, children, family members, etc. It was keeping it in the family, as it says on the screen. So I suppose, what I'm here to kind of explain, what do we actually do? And again, the reason I've told you why we're only 1,000 people, my team is only 4 of us. We have an entire budget for all our recruitment across the year, including everything from admin through to full equity hires, which is about 300, of under £30,000. And that includes things like LinkedIn licenses for our jobs, which are £19,000. So we don't have much money and we don't have much human resource. One thing we did do is we asked the question, well, our graduate programs used to ask for a 2-1 or above in degree classification, as well as an A and 2Bs as a minimum, absolute minimum, as the partners used to say, to apply for a graduate scheme, to apply for a training contract with us. So we just got rid of it. And it's easy to sit here now and say we just got rid of it. I'll just correct that. I got rid of it. And that was off the back of doing exactly the same at Tesco, seeing it work, going to Whitbread, absolutely immediately doing it and seeing that really work. And I thought it can't be much different in law. So anyway, made that decision, and very quickly we, as in the recruitment team, started to see some great traction. David likes this part of this story. It's now quite a fabled story. If anyone's applied to a graduate scheme, typically you get offered a job, you then either go and finish your final year or do another year's contract. It's about 2 years until you actually start the organisation. So I knew I had 2 years before somebody found out I'd actually done this. When they did, it was quite a short conversation to be, I see my new graduate's got a 2-2. What were the mitigating circumstances? Well, there wasn't any. But they're brilliant. Okay, so let's focus on that part. They're brilliant. Didn't think anything of it. 5 minutes later, the phone rings. My boss says, "What have you done?" I've just had the senior partner on saying you've took all the academics off 2 years ago. Long and short of it is I was asked to a board meeting. Nobody could explain why we asked for those grades. I was also had, continual the message back, which being a partner in a law firm is the most successful thing you can be. So when I pointed out, well, actually in the 2 years, I haven't just sat there idly, I have done my research and found out that 1 in 5 of our partners, 20% of you, have a 2-2. You can't, you can't even apply for your own, you can't even apply for your own graduate program. It's fair to say after that, and that was around 2018, things got a little easier for me. So my ask is just always ask yourself, is it genuinely required or not? So what we started doing, and I'll just get through these in the next couple of minutes, is it's all about, again, huge kudos to the Social Mobility Foundation. It's about looking at somebody's potential, looking at them in context to the background that they've come from, and having processes that reflect that. Sarah will say this and take words out of your mouth, but it's change your process, not the people. And that's another takeaway, I'm sure, which we'll come back to. So very quickly, so what we actually did, we just decided to do things a bit differently. We now did anonymise any application, so no reference to name, gender, ethnicity, etc., what your grades were, what universities you went to, if you've had work experience. In brackets there, it will say RARE as well. We also partnered with RARE, the company who have the contextualised recruitment system, which is a fantastic system. That was a 5K spend of the very limited budget we have, but we felt it was worth it. It allows us to introduce what we call a second look process. So if somebody is set to be rejected as part of an interview, we will dive into the background and understand, is there a flag there, which means that actually we've missed something. Their performance either in a recruitment process or an interview may have been slightly off. compared to others because actually their background is actually different. So we've introduced that. On average, about 8% of candidates come back into the process. But actually of those 8%, I think it's just under 70% actually get very deep or hired in the process. So it does show that if we didn't do that, we'd lose in talent we'd want. Redesign the careers website, again, absolutely with guidance, case studies provided to us from Social Mobility Foundation as to what best practice looks like. You know, it's very difficult to find information on it if somebody doesn't tell you. So it's complete transparent, what you're expected to do, what we're looking for. Here's some genuine practices, so that it's the classic phrase, it's not giving an advantage to somebody, it's removing the disadvantage to somebody if they're not used to being in a process like this. My clicker's stopped working, so I'll press it a bit harder. Again, one of the big differences for us, and this links to, I think, our second point. Yeah, so these are joined. We've learned a huge amount about the UK's geography and social mobility cold spots over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. And it's a really strange thing to say. We rarely would go to a Russell Group university. And just to be clear, that's not because there isn't talent there. But what we're finding, excuse me, is we go to a lot of universities where they get so little attention from the careers teams, who might only be able to afford to go to 15 careers fairs or 20 careers fairs. Most of our Russell Group talent does find its way naturally to us because they've got a great network. They've usually got good careers advisors around them. They don't need the extra helping hand that somebody at I won't say where, a different university, a more diverse but a lower ranked university has. So we don't actually go to any careers fairs, with the exception of, well, I say we do, but we don't go to anywhere exclusively. We invite every university to attend our careers fairs, of which we put on for everybody. We partnered with a company called Young Professionals. Young Professionals are aimed really at the school leaver space, but they are starting to get into universities. The reason we have such big outreach is that we invite every school, every college, every university in the UK, and we put on a great speaker lineup. But it's not about Browne Jacobson. It's about getting into the profession, whether you want to be a barrister, in chambers, in-house, etc. We absolutely steer clear of saying this is a Browne Jacobson event. The first one we put on, I was quite shocked, tuned in and on Zoom, it was during lockdown, to see the participants was 7,120 students turned up. It turned out to be the largest live virtual work experience event that the country had seen. Last couple of bits, so again, talked about work experience. We put a target in place, saying a minimum, an absolute minimum, to start with. 50% of our places needed to be ring-fenced for those from low socio-economic backgrounds with no connection to the firm. And everything, all 80, will be paid. We actually ended up with a higher number of that, which I'll come on to in a sec. And then also where clients did ask, we're very unashamedly now saying, well, okay, if there is a reason, and it has to be a very good one for us to take your connected person, we will only do that if you provide an equivalent paid work experience program in your organisation with exactly the same structure, costs, etc. That allows us to look not just at law as a work experience, but actually allow us to give opportunities in other sectors and industries as well. Okay, got one more slide, or 2 more slides maximum. So I guess the question is, did it make a difference? I'll put up the figures and I'll let you decide if you feel it did. But basically, 45% of our training contract offers now go to candidates that wouldn't have previously been able to apply based on the grades that we had. It's not just about getting people in, as I've said, it's about keeping people. So 90% of those were retained, 25 or 26%, sorry, did have grades that wouldn't have been previously eligible to apply. We have a mentee program. We had 13 people on the program this year, and 5, I think that's the right number, 5 or 4 or 5, if not, it's slightly higher, of our mentees have actually been employed by the firm, either as graduate programs or into entry-level roles, which is great. And then the very last slide I have, and this is where some of the intersectionality comes in. I talked about that 7%. 45% of our junior lawyers are now either black, Asian, minority ethnic. And that is honestly as a result of looking through our processes very differently, making sure that online tests were appropriate to different ethnic groups, etc. I've talked about the shift. We were 100% Russell Group previously, and we're now 65% non-Russell Group, 35%, excuse me, my voice is going, 35% Russell Group, so more reflective of the numbers. And 85% of internships actually went to individuals of low socioeconomic backgrounds. And in total, in the last 12 months, I can't believe I'm saying this, 23,500 students have been at our online careers events, of which 62% low socioeconomic backgrounds and 52% Black, Asian, minority ethnic.
That's clearly, I think Tom's being rather modest there with some of those achievements are fantastic. Some of the things that I picked out there are the importance of data. So being able to sort of zone in on what the real problems are. You don't really know what the issue is until you do that. The outreach I think is really, really important. And particularly, you mentioned regions there. If any industry is pretty London, South East, or maybe Edinburgh-centric, it's our one. So there's things we can learn there. And then the idea of the accessibility for those people I thought were fantastic. What I wanted to ask you, and to give Tom's voice a proper rest, grab a drink, Tom, Sarah, is how typical is that? I mean, not the extent of the success, but how sort of typical is that journey in terms of the things that firms that do well in social mobility?
Yeah, so what's unusual about what Browne Jacobson did is that they did it with so much focus and they did it so quickly. We don't see that very often. But in terms of what the organisation has done, the kinds of things, these are exactly the sorts of things that we talk about. We've seen, there's nothing Browne Jacobson have done that other organisations haven't also done. And there are things that we've said to Browne Jacobson, we'd like you to look at this next too. So it's what they've done, fairly typical, fairly accessible, fairly doable. The pace and the focus is the thing that's unusual and is the thing that's put them top of our index. And that's the thing I encourage other organisations to look at, that it is possible with focus and with partnership, and therefore not with a huge budget, it is possible to move through this. And the more you move through it, the more you feel confident that this is the right thing to do. At the beginning of this, there's often a small group of people agitating for this. The real sign of success is 3-4 years later, you've got the leadership going, I'm so pleased that I said that we should do this. And you're going, yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, that's great. Well done.
We've got a kind of a Slido question up here. I'm not sure if it's on both. It's basically asking why so few firms are in that index. And a lot of people here, the top thing is data is the issue. And the second one is it comes behind some other diversity projects. I guess solving the first might help solve the second. If that's true, what are the key things you both think people can take away from here to start getting people to really data? Is it to get CEO buy-in? Is it what is it? The sort of practical things to make sure you've got the tools you need to go and answer, or go and sort of
I think so. I mean, I can't. As I said, I can't think of the word. I can't over sort of emphasise how important data is, and the biggest thing is whether you like what the data tells you or you don't. It tells you what is factually what you've got, and it's something to work on, and it's that first step. So the data will tell you something, and I think that's the most important part. I mean, from my side, sorry, I appreciate the clock is ticking. In our world, the other sort of significant difference that's changed, and Sarah and I have talked about this, is the pressure that's coming from clients or in bids and tenders. Now, obviously, we're quite some way ahead of the curve because we've had our journey and our story for some time. So it's easier for us to answer some of the questions when a client says, well, actually, what is your 40% of your score in your tender is going to be towards what you're doing for diversity, etc. That is creating a bit of a pressure for people now. But, carrot and stick we've talked about. But actually, you're going to have to get the data at some point, I think, anyway. So start now.
That's a great message. And I think as that applies to us, you can think about the asset owners diversity charter, which is already starting to collect predominantly gender and race and ethnicity questions, but I'm sure will be expanded. And if you think about how the investment savings generally does its business, it's typically by managing other people's assets And I suspect the heads of sales of some of our asset managers will be knocking down some CEO doors if they're not allowed to participate and get their bonuses and so on. So hopefully there's a bit of carrot and stick in both of this, but something for us to take away. We've got a few minutes left, and I'd love to throw this open to the floor to give some of you a chance to pick the brains of both Tom and Sarah, and I could see some questions. How do you avoid positive discrimination? I think that's a good question to start off with.
Yeah, so no one is asking you to take people who aren't good enough. No one is asking you to be unfair. What we're asking you to look at is, what are the barriers that people might face? What's the context in which people have come to your organisation? If you take context into account, and if you take away some of the sort of the obvious financial barriers and some of the barriers of network and kind of unfair advantage, if in the end then you've got someone from a professional background who is better, you give them the job. And the young people that we work with do not want to be the diversity hire or the preferred person. They want to be seen as good enough. They want to be seen on their own merits. We just know that if you give them the same opportunity and the same access to help that their more privileged peers have had, they will compete on a level playing field every time.
Tom, anything to add? No, well, that was easy. There's one here. How do you find out through interviews or CVs on someone's background without prying? And I suppose the other part of that question, which isn't there, is should we?
So exactly the right answer, yeah. Your background should be kept anonymous. Your process, if it's the right or a robust enough process, shouldn't need to look at somebody's background when you're deciding whether to offer them a job or not.
And in some of this hiring, I guess there's a kind of fear factor, the whole cultural fit. It's maybe easier to go back to your investment team or any department and say, well, look, this person's a bit like us. What do you think we can do to kind of make people have the confidence to be able to not do that? Is it reverse mentoring? Are there particular things we can do to kind of help move that dial a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the organisations that partner with us for work experience and for internships with young people see the talent, they see the capability, and yes, they see the difference. They say, this young person didn't present with some of the polish that I'm used to. Sometimes we get feedback saying, they weren't terribly professional, which at 17 we say, yeah, no, they're not. But they can see the talent, they can see the difference. And in those opportunities, they learn a bit more about what it takes and what those young people offer. So, that is really powerful. Just those connections and letting them do the job can be really powerful.
And once we've got them in, hopefully we do manage to get them in the way that you have, what are the key things we should do to encourage their progression through the firm? Because obviously, back to that 9 out of 10 stats on senior leaders, we kind of want to change the dial there as well. Is it a case of if we get enough in, it just happens, or do we really need to?
No. We need to look at progression. We need to look at social mobility in your retention strategies. We need to look at normalising the conversation around not just getting in, but getting on. And we need leaders to lead when it comes to social mobility in your organisation.
Perfect.
Great. I think we're actually out of time. I'd love to stay here and take more questions. We will be around afterwards, so if you do have any, then please come up and ask. This leaves me to thank Tom and Sarah for their time. I knew half of this already, and I was still fascinated and transfixed by it. So it's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much, and I hope you all got some of those learnings and inspiration that came up on the bubble chart earlier. Thank you very much.